first thing I do in making this pie is I get the 1 stick of the butter and I soften it. I usually let it sit out if I got time. If not, just warm it up in the microwave. But don't make it too liquidy because it just makes it hard for the topping to go on the pie unless you refrigerate it. So this is the topping that goes on the pie. So 1 stick of butter is what I put in the bowl. And then I will do 1 or 1/2 cup of flour in with this mix. And 1 or 1/2 cup of brown sugar. And then when it comes to the cinnamon, I really don't have a measurement. I just add a lot. So just dump it on until whatever you think is good enough for you or your family when it comes to the cinnamon. Mix that all up, get it all mixed in together, and then you can just set this off to the side. After you get it all mixed up, this should kind of look like that, almost like a bread dough. And I just set that off to the side. If you happen to melt the butter too much, so it's super runny, like I said, just take it and put it in the refrigerator, but don't forget it. I've made multiple pies where I forget to get it out of the refrigerator, put the pie together, and then realize that I didn't get the topping out of the refrigerator and have to take the pie back apart. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start getting the apples ready, get them cut up with the peeler. I like to use Jonathan apples. I know you said you never heard of them before. There's a Jonathan Gold. They're just different apples that we've tried out, and I think they're the best. But being here in Hawaii, kind of limited on what we can get, and I know that Galas are pretty much an apple that you can. I like these because they still have a consistency. They don't like break down and like soft and mushy when you cook with them. They kind of hold somewhat together, but not too much that they just are crunchy when you eat them. I know some people like that when it comes to their apple pies like Granny Smith's, but I just think Granny Smith's just don't cook down enough. So I use Gala if I have to, just because they're pretty much all year round. I know I told you to get 2 5-pound bags because I thought the bags came in 5 pounds, but I forgot they're 3, so you're just gonna have a bunch of extra apples to eat. I usually use 1 3-pound bag, and it just depends on how big I want the pie. The bigger the pie, the harder it is to keep it from like just being too full. So I usually use 1 3-pound bag and about half of the other 3-pound bag. So if you've never used one of these apple peeler things before, they're super simple. The biggest thing you need to make sure is the blade that peels the apple is adjusted so you're not taking off too much of the apple, the meat, and it just takes the skin off. Because if you get too much of the meat, then it's just less apple in the pie. So you just kind of stick the apple, it doesn't matter, try to center it as much as you can onto the peeler. So like I said, try to center it as much as I can, and you just run it in. Like I said, you want to make sure that this blade is adjusted right. Sometimes I have to adjust it because it moves, and so it just cuts off some of the skin, and it just runs through there, and then it gets to here, and then it just cores it. Even now it's kind of cutting a little bit too much skin or meat, but see this stuff right here? I wish there was a way we could find out a way to cook with this, because this stuff is pretty cool. All right, so run it all the way down, and then your apple will just slide right off. And I usually just take it, cut it in half, and just stick it in the bowl. And you'll do that through the entire bag and a half of apples. First one, don't crank it all the way back to bring it back. There should be a knob or a thing that just slides it back, and then you just start it over. I think 2 apples left in the second bag, so almost 6 pounds of apples peeled and cored though. So then you take a 1.5 cups of sugar and you just dump it all over the apples. And then I use a 1/2 cup of flour. Now, depending on how juicy the apples are, sometimes I need to add more flour because when it bakes, it just has so much liquid in there that you need the flour to kind of turn it into a gel. But these apples ain't too juicy, so I just do a 1/2 cup of flour and then cinnamon. Like I said, same thing with the topping. You just kind of add how much cinnamon you want. I don't have an exact measurement. I thought about measuring it out, but I don't know. I just kind of add it. Like I said, I use a decent amount. And then when I mix this up, I don't necessarily like to use a spoon because it breaks the apples up, and I like trying to keep them as whole as I can. So I just kind of get in there and just start mixing it up. It's kind of messy, but some people have fun at it. If anything, you want to use like a spatula or something, just roll it in there, turn it in there, I don't know what they call that. Just make sure you just mix it all up, just get all the apples covered. A lot of times after this sits, the sugar pulls out all the juices from the apple, so you get a bunch of juice down in the bottom of the bowl, which is totally fine. But just get all the apples mixed up, nice and messy. Set this off to the side with the topping, and then you can start working on the crust. I'm going to do the simple, easy way. Pillsbury pie crust is great. So with my pies, because they're so big, especially like the crust area, if I have to use the pre-made pie crust for the base, I end up taking, there's two crusts per package. So I ended up taking both of them out. I let the bottom part sit out for a little bit to get a little bit more pliable. I add them to each other, and then I will just roll them out together to make one big thick pie crust. So then just roll it all out. Try to get it as even as you can, but it's not going to be too crazy just because a lot of times you want to get that center out because the outsides will roll thin. I don't necessarily have a diameter of how wide to tell you to roll it, but maybe 3 inches outside of the pie the pie pan. But the pie pan that I use is like a big one. You can get the smaller ones, like the 9-inch pie pans, but I use a really big one because it holds more pie and it's wider up here, so it gives you that big thick crust. So you can get these at Walmart. It's just the Pyrex 11-inch maybe, I'm not sure. No, this is 9.5. So then once I get this to about the width that I want, I will bring the pie pan over, pick it up, just lay it in here, and then just kind of start running it down the sides, and then leave your crust hang over the edge. Try to make it as even as you can all around. Different ways you can do this. The last few pies that I've been making, I've been starting to do like a lattice braided, super fancy type thing. I'm gonna do that with this pie, but I'm I'm not going to go through all the steps of showing you how to do that because it takes so long of having to braid it and weave it. One of the things I used to do, I don't have it here because I left it back in Oklahoma. You can get it on Amazon or you can use cookie cutters, but they have the round pie cutters that you just pretty much roll out your dough and you just cut it, and it leaves it cuts out the things that you want. Put the pie crust on top, roll your edges on your crust, and then that's the top. I'll get to that point, but with mine, I'm doing the braided thing, so you'll see how I do that here in a few minutes, or how it's made with that on top in a few minutes. But all you need to do is with your crust, figure out the best way you want to do it, the simplest way, but you need to have some sort of opening at the top, because if not, the flour will rise and it's going to split the pie anyways. Mine still seem to crack in different places, especially if it's more full. So the cutouts usually just kind of help relieve where it's going to crack anyways. So just use your pie crust, cut out what you want, designs you want to make it look pretty. Alright, so you take your apples, and like I said, if they sat for a little bit, I kind of help mix them up just a little bit because there's massive juice in here. Take it, dump it in your pie. This is going to be a pretty big pie for me. It's what I normally make. Like I said, I like them like stuffed full if I can. But you don't always have to make them that way, especially if you have a smaller family or you're not sharing with people. Just get it all dumped in there. And if you can keep everybody else from eating these pieces of apples while you're making it, it's nice. But my family tends to just sit here and eat the sugar-covered apples. So I like to take it and kind of press it down, not super hard so it breaks up the apples, but enough where it kind of condenses everything. And the longer that the apples sit in the sugar flour mix, you'll see how much juice is really in the apples. So then I pack that all on there, and then I get the topping, and then I'll take the topping and just kind of flatten the pieces out, and then just start covering the top of the pie with the topping. This is kind of the stuff that will seep out if you don't have enough holes in it, or it just cracks the pie because the flour rises. I mean, it does with the flour that's on the apples themselves, but it's more so in this. So then once I get all of this put on there, then I will start working on the crust, assembling it. And so this depends on how you want to do it. Put your crust on, fold your edges. I'll show you how I fold my edges in a moment. With the regular crust, but you want to make sure you have your cuttings off of the crust before you do it on here. Alright, so this is after I've done my lattice. The juices out. So then after I get this, if you just put your top on, because you don't want to be baking with your shirt off. Dad joke. Anyways, after you put your pie crust on the top, then you have all that stuff hanging over, and you'll use that for your thicker crust. So all I do is just start rolling it in. It doesn't necessarily look the prettiest. That's what I think I like about it, is it's kind of rough looking. And I just roll up all the corners, or all the edges, rolling it inwards. then after I roll all of them up, I go through and then just start, I don't know if you've ever made like pot stickers or dumplings or anything like that, but you just start pinching the corners. Why do I keep saying corners? It's edges. Keep pinching the edges to make your crust. I have a feeling this pie is probably going to overflow. So when you put it in the oven, at least with mine, I'm going to put a cookie sheet under it, or a baking sheet, because I don't want it to dump all over the bottom of the oven. So just go through, pinch all of your edges. Brush the crust, not crazy because it'll burn, but just enough to kind of put a glaze on it. This kind of helps get the sheen. Go around the crust, the top of the pie itself. And then after I get all that brushed on there, I get sugar. Just put a little bit in my hand of the sugar and just kind of sprinkle it on the top of the pie, not crazy because the sugar will burn. And just make the top of the pie look bad. Just enough to kind of put a little bit of sweetness on that crust. And then after the pie is done, finished cooking, I will take honey and kind of drizzle it all over the pie itself, and then put sugar back on it again while it's still hot. So you take your pan, cookie sheet, put it on there so if it does overflow, it's not making a mess in your oven. At 415 degrees for about 15 minutes. Middle of the rack. Didn't set the timers, so this is what happens if you let it go too long, because you want to cover it up with the foil. It's not bad, but it looks ugly. So anyways, this is when you take your foil. What I do is I just have a little piece of foil like this that goes over the center. So what this is going to do, it's going to protect the foil itself, but allow the pie to cook on the inside. So if you get one of those pie crust covers, like I told you can get at Walmart, you just set it over the top of it and you're fine. If you don't have that, I just take foil, kind of form a thing around it where it protects that crust, and then I stick it back in the oven for about 45 minutes and drop my temperature of my oven down to 375 and let it cook in there at 375 for about 45 minutes. Shut it off. All right, so here's the pie after I pulled it out of the oven. So, like I said, you got some of this blackened stuff on here. It's not too bad, but I think I put a little too much of the egg wash and sugar on it, and so it burned it quicker than I expected. So when you put it on there, just be careful not to put so much on there. Super light layer of it. But this is after it's come out. After I've got this out of the oven, I take honey and drizzle it all over the top of it, and then just take sugar and sprinkle it, so it just kind of gives it that extra sweetness, crunchiness on the crust. And there you have your apple pie.